Ladies and gentlemen, it's Tuesday night if you're watching on Facebook. And Bo knows this is prime time because tonight we're back again for your weekly dose of Convince Me. As always, one of your hosts, I am Andy Rutherford, joined by my other two hosts, Mr. Casey Elrod, Mr. Brian Bennett. Gentlemen, are you looking forward to this week's show?
I know he is.
I've been looking forward to this my whole life.
We've got a pretty big show for you guys, but before we get into the meat of the matter, we've got some housekeeping things to do. We've got a couple of announcements before our typical shield job. The first announcement we want to get to tonight is the winner of our $50 giveaway. I want to thank everybody that entered. Even those that didn't send us the email to qualify for the contest, still, if you went and nominated us, we appreciate that. The slate comes out this Friday. If we're on it, I'm sure we'll be bragging about it on our socials. If we're not, we'll probably never mention it again. But we appreciate all your help in trying to get us nominated. And the winner by random draw of that $50 directly from my pocket to yours, congratulations, Mr. Matthew Jones. Matthew Jones is the winner of our $50 giveaway. And guys, if we are on that list, if we are nominated, there's probably going to be an even bigger giveaway. So keep your fingers crossed that happens. We should know by the end of the week. Now, for the big changes as far as how we're going to do things going forward. These are pretty big changes compared to what we've been doing. Guys, you know, we started this thing about 4 months ago, just kind of because we were bored. We were bored during quarantine and came up with this idea, made it a little Facebook show, turned it into a podcast. We've been going pretty good here for about 4 months. Well, we realized that it's a lot to ask of you guys, those of you that are used to watching us on Tuesday. On Facebook, we realize it's a lot to ask you to sit down and look at your phone or your computer screen for an hour, hour and a half. Sometimes we push 2 hours on this thing. We know that's a lot to ask.
Come on.
So
hold on. You know they want it. They want 3 hours of me. You know they do.
We know you don't want to sit and watch us for that long of amount of a time anymore. It's us asking a lot of you, and we're not going to be asking that of you anymore. We're still going to be here every Tuesday night on Facebook. But really, it'll just be this opening segment and the opening arguments for whatever the discussion is. And then we're going to cut it off. We're going to use Tuesday as kind of a teaser spot, kind of let you guys know what's going on. And you'll have to go check out the podcast on Wednesdays to go see how the show goes, how the argument shakes out. Those of you that listen to us on Wednesdays on the podcast, nothing's changing for you. Everything's staying the same. Podcast will still drop on Wednesdays, but Tuesday nights, we'll no longer be showing the whole show here. We'll just give you the opening part to kind of whet your appetite. And then on Wednesdays, you can check it out. If you do really enjoy watching us, the videos will still be available on YouTube, and I have been uploading them a week after the fact. I won't be doing that anymore. This episode we're recording right now. Instead of going up next Tuesday, I'll probably get it up Friday or Saturday sometime. And next week's episode, when the podcast drops on Wednesday morning, the video will drop on YouTube sometime Wednesday as well. So the YouTube and the podcast will come out at the same time for those of you that do like looking at us. But the long Facebook shows will not be going on anymore. But some of you may feel gypped and like we're taking something away from you. The other big change we want to announce is that we're giving you something. We're giving you the opportunity to control this show in a lot of ways. Not every week, but a lot of weeks. We're going to get on, and right after the show on Tuesday, you guys will have a chance to vote on what you want the topic to be for next week's show. over on Twitter, at Convince Me Show on Twitter. There will be a poll there for you guys to vote on what you want the next week's topic to be. And we'll go ahead. Well, actually, we'll wait. Next week will be the first show you vote on. The poll will drop right after this video ends here on Facebook on Tuesday night. On Tuesday night, the poll will be up. If you're listening to us on Wednesday, the poll is already up. Get over there and vote. We'll tell you what those topics are at the end of this show today. People power. There we go. We'll tell you what those topics are. Again, that's going to be over at Twitter. So if you're not following us on Twitter, if you want to vote on what the show is going to be, go follow us on Twitter at Convince Me Show. We're on Instagram, Convince Me Show. And, of course, we're on Facebook. For those that aren't watching on Facebook already, facebook.com/Convince Me Show. YouTube is tinyurl.com/Convince Me Show. Gentlemen, any other shills or anything, any newsworthy things we need to get out before we really get into this show?
I think I ought to cover it all.
Right, you could sell water to an Inuit.
Water to a what?
Inuit.
Would it be frozen water? Is it anything like selling ice to an Eskimo? Or I guess you can't say Eskimo anymore.
That's the whole point. I was trying to be politically correct here.
Is there something impolitically correct about saying ice? Why would you say water?
Keep it in its natural state. You shouldn't classify it as a particular state.
Stay tuned.
Are you assuming it's state, Elrod?
Stay tuned for next week's episode. It's going to be great.
Anyway, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are somewhere in the state of the world with COVID-19, but we don't know how much longer it'll be. Hopefully not that long, but what we are seeing are sports starting to come back. Baseball is back. Basketball is back. Hockey is back. And soon to be, within the next couple months, football will be back. Fantasy football planning for the league that us three are in has already started. Sports are back, and us three and most of you listening probably couldn't be happier. But there are a lot of guys on the court, on the field, that had a dream of playing whatever sport they're playing as a child, as a lot of us did. And a vast majority of us, us three in this discussion, were unsuccessful at doing that on a professional level. Very few people get to play sports professionally, and even fewer get to play two professionally. There have been a handful of people that have done it. I should have thought more about this. I know this will give Bennett, this will be a Bennett point, even though I'm not arguing anything tonight. Charlie Ward played two sports professionally. Brian Jordan played two sports professionally. Tim Tebow, Rut Point, played two sports professionally. But on that short list, really, when you talk about which one's better, typically you're going to get one of two answers. Both these gentlemen played both football and baseball. The answer you're going to get is either Bo Jackson, who will be represented tonight by Mr. Elrod, or Neon Deion Sanders, represented tonight by Mr. Bennett. Gentlemen, are you ready to get this show on the road?
Do it.
Let's go.
All right. Do you have pen and paper?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Here's what I'm going to want you to do. Both these men played in the NFL, scored some touchdowns. Both of these men played Major League Baseball and hit some home runs. The closest to the number of the total number of home runs and touchdowns by Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders is the number you're looking for. So there's four numbers there. Career home runs by Bo, career home runs by Deion, career touchdowns by Bo, career touchdowns by Deion. Put those four numbers together, and what number do you have?
Okay.
All right, hang on. Okay.
Show them.
132.
132, 215. I didn't say closest without going over. So the correct answer is 199.
Ooh.
So Bennett will win the tiebreaker. Bo had 141 home runs. Deion had 39. Bo had 16 touchdowns. Deion had 3, which isn't bad for mainly a defender. So Bennett, will you be going first or second tonight?
I'll go first.
All right, you're up.
All right. As I usually do, we're going to go back in time a little bit. We're going to go back to 1995. This specifically, 1995, sometime around the fall. This was a monumental year of sports for me. You had the Braves that were about to win the World Series 8 days after my 9th birthday. And you had the Dallas Cowboys, who were my favorite football team at the time before the Titans came into existence. They were about to acquire a guy by the name of Deion Sanders. And this would be the start of a lifelong fandom for me. Now, I knew about Deion a little bit when he was in Atlanta and San Francisco, but it really wasn't until he joined the Cowboys that I really started to follow his career and be influenced by Mr. Neon Deion. I remember when I was playing junior pro football, I had to get that number 21, which I got a couple of times. I was proud about that. He became my favorite player in 95 pretty much instantly, and here we are 25 years later, and he's still my all-time favorite player. When I was thinking about this, I got to thinking when I was little, I was huge into collecting sports cards. And I still do to an extent today, but not like I did back then. And there's a particular Deion Sanders card that's probably one of my favorite Deion cards. It's not an expensive card. It's not rare. It's not autographed or nothing like that. It's from the 1995 Skybox Impact. It's a insert card called Countdown to Impacts. And on the front of this card, it has Deion in his 49ers gear, and it has like this green background, and it has like these numbers, like you'd see like a stopwatch ticking down or something. It's at 11 seconds. And you flip the card over on the back, and it pretty much goes to tell you that Deion went from one end zone to the other in 11 seconds, and that counted 20 yards of high stepping. And to me, that just illustrates how freakishly talented that he was. Love that card. I still have that card, so I need to dig that card out. But it just shows that his speed made him a world-class athlete. His talents and his abilities on both the diamond and the gridiron made him like a once-in-a-generation type talent. And he changed the game at the cornerback position. His showmanship, his persona, made him the most electrifying man in sports entertainment way before The Rock. He's got a super long list of accomplishments, his flashy style, his revolutionary skills, particularly at the kick return and at the cornerback position, make him, in my opinion, the greatest multi-sport athlete of all time. And Mr. Rutt, tonight, after I lay out all the evidence in front of you, I will convince you that Deion Sanders is slightly greater than Bo Jackson.
All right. Mr. Elrod, tell us what you know about Bo.
The words of the great Lee Corso, not so fast, my friends. Right. He just took you back in time in 1995. But get me in the DeLorean time machine with me and go back a long time to the 1920s. Let's talk about the great athletes of the 20th century.
Jim Thorpe.
Jim Thorpe, first one that comes to mind. But also in that same time period, when you think of great athletes that were ahead of their time in terms of how they physically dominated their sport. George Herman Ruth, Babe Ruth, even though he was, some people call him a fat slob, nobody in the entire world could hit a baseball better than he could in the 20s and 30s. Now, you talked about Jim Thorpe dominating track and field. Well, let's go to the 50s and the 60s. In the ring, Muhammad Ali. Nobody was more physically dominant than him in this time. Wilt Chamberlain in basketball. We get to the 60s and the 70s. Nobody was more physically dominant in football than the great Jim Brown. We transition into the 70s and 80s, and we get the greatest physical specimen in the history of sports. And that, my friend, is not Deion Sanders. It is Bo Jackson. We're going to talk about a lot tonight. We're going to talk about how there's a lot of folklore that surrounds Bo Jackson about these crazy stories that happened to him in his lifetime, especially on the gridiron and also on the baseball field. But we're going to talk about the 40-yard dash that he ran at the combine. We're going to talk about how fast that was, about why it's not typically held up right now as the fastest time, but he was timed. We will talk about that. We'll talk about how he pretty much is a modern-day Paul Bunyan in terms of the myth of Bo Jackson. Now, I like Deion Sanders. Even though he's flashy, he's a little bit out there. But Prime Time said this about Bo Jackson. He said, if there wasn't Bo, there'd be no Prime. So we'll talk about the influences. We'll talk about the statistics. The statistics, especially on the baseball diamond, favor Bo Jackson, and it's not even close. It's not even close. We'll talk about that. This argument tonight is really who is the better two-sport star. Now, Deion Sanders played more in the NFL. He's one of the best cornerbacks of all time. We'll talk about how injuries really – one of the great what-ifs in sports is if Bo Jackson doesn't have this hip injury. We'll talk about that later. But at the end of the day, Sir Rod, I know this. The people know this. And by golly, Bo knows who's better in this argument. And it is the great Bo Jackson.
Well, you don't have to convince Bo. You've got to convince me tonight. But you can start doing that. But tell me where it all began. Tell me about Bo kind of growing up in his high school athletics and his time yelling War Eagle in Auburn.
So we're taking this DeLorean time machine now to the 60s. Vincent Edward Bo Jackson. It's hard to believe he's 57 now. But he was the 8th of 10 children, and he is the pride of Bessemer, Alabama, which is basically right outside of Hoover. If you haven't watched the 30 for 30 in Bo Jackson, you got to watch it. It's one of the 5 best ones, I think. But it does a good job about talking about how Bo had a absentee father. His father was never there for him. Bo Jackson, even at an early age, had above average size for his age, but he also had this terrible stutter that kids were relentless in terms of bullying him about. This was something that was with him for a long time in his youth. But Bo Jackson, instead of taking the mindset, I'm just going to let these people run over me, he was dishing some pain out to these kids. He did not like the fact that he was being stuttered. And matter of fact, he has a quote that says, I could beat up on the other kids and steal their lunch money and buy myself something to eat, but I couldn't steal a father. His whole life, he's trying to find that father figure, someone that's going to stand up, and he never really found it. But he did have a mother, and her life goal for Bo was for him to go to college. That's all she wanted. And she knew that the vehicle for him, based on his athletic ability, was going to be sports. So growing up, he gets to high school there near Hoover. His family describes him as a wild boar hog. And this is where he gets the name Bo short for Boar, because he was always in trouble in high school. He was always getting in trouble. He was always causing mischief. But he finally found some solace in sports. He goes out for the high school football team, McCullough High, and he immediately rushes for 1,200 yards his first season. He's a two-sport star. He's one of these rare people that are a true two-sport athlete, and it was a natural ability. This was nothing that he started from age 4, and he was going to focus on one thing. He was naturally gifted at both sports. He also loves track and field. But the one thing that he hates the most is distance running. Hates it. So he goes out for the decathlon, and he becomes a 2-time state champion in the decathlon. And his statistics in terms of the decathlon was so much greater than his competition. He didn't have to run the distance in the decathlon. He skipped it in both of his state championship runs in Alabama. So he becomes a decathlon champion. The New York Yankees take stock in his baseball abilities, and they draft him into the second round of the draft in '82. But Auburn comes calling, and they want him to play football. Well, right around this time is the time that Bear Bryant is about to leave Alabama. And it's always been interesting how Bo Jackson has probably – back in the 80s, you didn't have 24/7 sports. You didn't have rivals. You didn't have these recruiting services. But Bo Jackson was the consensus #1 high school football athlete coming out in '82. The Auburn recruiters told Bo and his family, hey, the Bear's about to retire. You got to come to Auburn. And they believe this. And actually, he did retire. So he goes to Auburn. That's the reason why Bo Jackson's legacy is not in Tuscaloosa. It's at Auburn. Well, his career at Auburn, what can you say? He's a two-sport athlete at Auburn. He's more known for his work on the gridiron. He is regarded as the greatest athlete in the history of Auburn football. You may see Cam Newton, some people, but if you look at the collective work, it's Bo Jackson. He rushes for 4,300 yards, 43 touchdowns, wins the Heisman Trophy. But the underlying thing about Bo Jackson, no matter how successful he is with the Heisman, all the accolades on the football field, he loves baseball. That's the sport he wants to play. And we'll talk more about his actual careers in Major League Baseball and pro football than not. But the underlying thing about Bo Jackson is he'll even say now, if he could go back and do it again, he would just play baseball. He thinks that football wrecked his life. He thinks that it took a lot of gifts from him. It ended up costing him both careers, the hip injury he suffered in that playoff game in Cincinnati, which we'll talk about tonight. But what can you say about Bo Jackson? Sugar Bowl MVP, brought Auburn back to relevance after 30 years of not having an SEC championship. He laid the groundwork for those 3 SEC championships that they won after he graduated. So think about Bo Jackson. It's almost equal his success that he had in baseball and football. You cannot say that for Mr. Sanders.
So you're saying he was better than Cadillac Williams?
A little bit.
Well, Bennett, tell me about the I guess, would it be early afternoon if it's before prime time? But the early life of Mr. Deion Sanders and into his time at Free Shoes, Florida State University.
Well, Mr. Deion Sanders grew up in Fort Myers, Florida, the same town as one of your boys, Javon Curse. They actually went to the same high school, North Fort Myers High School, the Red Knights. Well, fun fact there. Now, during his high school days, he was an all-state honoree in 3 sports. Not 2 sports. That's cute. 3 sports. Football, baseball, basketball. And in high school was actually where he got his nickname. After a particularly good night in basketball in high school, one of his buddies called him Prime Time, and it just stuck. And if you ask Deion, he'll actually tell you that, at least in high school, basketball was his passion. He loved basketball more than football or baseball. Now, of the three sports, by far, football would be where he shined the most. In high school, he played quarterback and cornerback. And he was named to the Florida High School Association All-Century Team in 1985, which basically what that is they take the 33 best high school football athletes of the last 100 years. So that's pretty incredible. The Royals picked up Deion. They selected him in the 6th round, but Deion didn't sign. He wasn't through playing all these other sports he wanted to play. Instead, he opted to pursue his talents at the collegiate level, and he wouldn't go far as he enrolled at Florida State University. Now, when he got there, he decided that he was going to drop basketball. I guess because he figured that he was way better at baseball and football. I don't know. Maybe if I get a chance to talk to him, I'll ask him. We'll see. But he said, I'm going to drop basketball. I'm going to focus just on football, just on baseball, just two. Well, that didn't last long because he gets to Florida State and he discovers track. So we'll talk a little bit about track first. He did track from 85 into 88, and he helped FSU capture a conference championship as a freshman. And there's a really, really interesting story about his time in track. He was actually playing a baseball game in Columbia, South Carolina in 1988, and it was a conference championship. And actually the FSU team was also at this same complex for track in a conference championship. But they were doing the 400-meter relay. You know, they didn't need Deion. That's not what Deion did. Deion did more of the 100-meter, the 55-meter, 50-meter, whatever it is. That's what he did. So they didn't need him. So he was okay to go play baseball. So he played a game or two, and the coach for track, guy's name is Dick Roberts. His second leg man for the 400-meter relay he got sick and he wasn't able to compete. So Mr. Roberts is like, what am I going to do? I don't have a guy to compete. So he goes over to the baseball complex and he talks to legendary coach Mike Martin and asked him and said, hey, is there any way I can borrow Deion? And, you know, they were actually in between games. They were waiting to play later on. So they said, sure, we'll let you play. So they asked Deion, it's like, hey, do you want to run track, run this 400-meter relay? And, of course, Deion's like, sure. He'd never done it before. So Deion actually jogs from the baseball complex to the place where they're holding the track meet. He changes outfits, puts on the track uniform. He gets a quick crash course in the baton, which usually takes people like weeks or months or even longer just to perfect. And he just gets a little 5-minute crash course on what to do. Well, they go on to finish second, which was good enough to get them the conference title. And Deion's 100 meters was clocked at 10.4. So after they've won the trophy, he jogs back to the baseball complex, and he hits a 2-run single and helps FSU get the conference title. So in one day, Deion Sanders helps to get 2 conference trophies. I thought that was crazy. Some of his best times in track, he did a 6.31 in the 55-meter, which was first place in the Fast Times Invitational. His best 100-meter that I have is a 10.21, which got him first place in the Eastern Airlines Invitational. Now, I talked a little bit about baseball and go into a little bit more. He actually did pretty good in baseball, too. You don't really hear much about his collegiate baseball because it was overshadowed so much by football. But like I said, he played under legendary coach Mike Martin. He hit a 331 in 1986, and he stole 27 bases in 87. And he helped power FSU to the College World Series and as a freshman, and they finished 5th that year. And then we speed up a little bit to football. This is definitely where everybody knows Deion for, played Florida State, big cornerback, number 2. This is where he had all his success. He started as a freshman in the secondary and then soon took over punt return and kick return duties. At cornerback, he was shutting down receivers so well, and he was so well respected and feared. By his junior year, they were already just like, we're not throwing to that side. We're going to throw it somewhere else. We're not throwing to Deion's side. And that seemed to be a theme throughout his whole career, collegiate and professional. And he wasn't really challenged much by the quarterbacks after that. He still finished with 5 interceptions in 9 games his senior year. That's not counting an interception in the end zone versus Auburn to preserve a victory in the 1988 Sugar Bowl. 32 years after he graduated, he's still tied for second with 14 interceptions. That's for the school record. He has also 4 touchdowns on defense. And he also is considered one of the best returners in NCAA history. He had a 15.2 his senior year, which led the nation in return yards. He was a 2-time first-team All-American, a 1-time third-team All-American, the 1988 Thorpe Award winner. And Mr. Bobby Bowden said that Deion Sanders is the measuring stick for athletic ability. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. He lettered in track, baseball, and football, making him one of basically the NCAA GOATs, really. He had All-America honors as a sprinter, played in the College World Series, and he had his number 2 retired by Florida State.
Nice. All right. Well, both these men, obviously, just natural God-given talents to be able to play multiple sports, both playing football, baseball, both running track. Deion with a little bit of basketball background. First thing I want to talk about, though, is the professional side of playing in Major League Baseball. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that wasn't Deion's first stop, but tell me a little bit about Deion's days in the MLB.
Now, we remember Deion as the football legend, one of the all-time greats. But what really makes him special is Deion, the leadoff hitter, the dangerous base stealer, and the speedy outfielder. He was so good, you got to think about that. Teams continued to sign him, knowing good and well that he's only going to play half the season. And then as soon as the NFL starts up, he's going to jump to NFL. Deion said himself that he's married to football and baseball is just his girlfriend. Now, he began his career in 1989 with the Yankees and would go on to play a total of 9 seasons in the MLB with 4 different teams. By far, probably his best seasons were in Atlanta. In 1992, he hit .304, had 26 stolen bases. He led the league with 14 triples, and he did all that in just 97 games. And I think he was at his very best in the 1992 World Series. He hit a .533 in the World Series. He had 4 runs, 8 hits, 2 doubles, 1 RBI, and he did all this with a broken bone in his foot. Had Atlanta pulled that out and not lost that World Series, I'm pretty confident that Deion would have been World Series MVP that year. Pretty confident about that. But we'll never know. In 1997 with the Reds, he finished second in the NL with 56 stolen bases. Now, Elrod talked a little bit in his opening about how it's not close that Bo Jackson is by far the better baseball player than Deion. I don't know about that. I took the liberty of pulling up some stats between the 2 guys. I think Bo played like around 8 years and Deion was around 9 years. So the numbers are fairly close as far as the time that they played. One doesn't play 2 years and one plays 20, nothing like that. You had Deion with 2,123 at-bats and Bo with 2,393 at-bats. So Bo has about a couple hundred more at bats, so that should be fairly close. You had Deion that finished with a lifetime 263 average. Bo finishes with a lifetime 250 average. Deion has 558 hits. Bo has 598. So Bo has about 40 more. Okay, good job. You had 40 more. The on-base percentage, Deion has a 319. Bo a 309. Home runs, okay, yeah. Deion had 39, like you said, right? Bo has 141. Bo was more of the power hitter. He had more home runs. He had more RBIs. He also had more strikeouts. Deion had 352 strikeouts. Bo, 841 strikeouts. That's a 35% strikeout rate. Slugging percentage, Deion had a respectable 392, Bo 474. Okay, not bad. Now, for Bo to be so fast, he only had 82 stolen bases. Deion had 186. You look at triples. Deion had 43 triples in his career. Bo, 14. Deion had 14 in one season. And that's only playing half the season before he went to go play football. Look at doubles, 72 doubles. Bo had 86. So Bo did have more of that. Bo also has the upper edge. I think Bo also broke more bats over his head than Deion did.
Dadgummit.
So
Don't steal my stuff.
hey, I'm just stating the facts. Bo had more bat breaks. It's an official stat, bat breaks. So you think, okay, maybe Deion looks on paper to be a little bit. I'd give Deion the edge here on paper. So maybe you think, okay, well, probably Bo makes up for it on defense. Maybe his fielding is superior. Let's look at that. Deion committed 23 errors in his career. Bo, 44 errors, double. So you look at the fielding percentage. Maybe that gives a little bit better number since Bo did probably play 200 more games or maybe something like that. Deion's fielding percentage was a 982, Bo a 962. So to me, it looks more like Deion was the better baseball player, even though Deion only did this part-time. Not bad for a guy that does this part-time on the side until football season starts up. He gave up baseball in 96, 98, and 99 and hung it up for good in 2001, which you talked about Bo with leaving a lot of untapped potential. Deion left a lot of untapped potential in baseball. John Smoltz said that he could have been one of the best leadoff hitters of all time. And then asked the question, what would his baseball career been like if that pesky little football career hadn't got in the way, if he had never played football? Another one of his Braves teammates, Otis Nixon, said if he had taken off that football uniform and said, I'm going all in the way to play Major League Baseball, Deion Sanders would have been in the Hall of Fame. I know that for a fact. Would he? We never know. That's tough to say. But Deion is the better all-around hitter, the all-around better base stealer, and the better all-around fielder. Legendary coach Mike Martin said the following when asked about Deion. And Coach Martin knows a thing or two about baseball talent. He's the all-time winningest coach in NCAA Division I baseball. He said this: he was so unique, so special. He was obviously one of a kind. I don't think there'd be much debate that if he was the best cover corner in the history of the NFL, but he really became a great baseball player too. So there's Deion's baseball career. Not too bad for part-time.
All right, what have you got to back up your opening statement claim that Bo was clearly better?
Well, we're going to get to that in a minute. And there's one very, and I mean very important statistic that Mr. Bennett left out. But I'm going to put you in suspense for that. But I want to take you back. This is going to intertwine with really the NFL career that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But going back to 1986, there was a lot of talk that Bo Jackson was going to be the number one pick in the NFL draft. Around February, March. This is right around the time that the college baseball starts. And Bo Jackson really wanted to make a decision on whether, do I want to continue this baseball thing or do I want to take the sure thing and be drafted number 1 by Tampa Bay? Well, the Tampa Bay owner, Hugh Culverhouse, went to the family and said, hey, I want to take Bo down here and interview him on my private jet. And this is when Bo Jackson is still a collegiate athlete at Auburn. And his family had some questions. Like, is this going to affect his eligibility for baseball? Because he really wants to, complete the season. Culverhouse said he cleared it with the NFL and the SEC. You're good. And the NCAA, you're good. Culverhouse flat out lied to the family. He never cleared anything. And once word got out that Bo had went on that trip, the NCAA would not let him play his last season of college baseball. And this led Bo Jackson and his family to tell Culverhouse, if you draft him number 1, he'll never play for you, flat out. It don't matter what contract you try to give him, he will never be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. So what happens? Tampa Bay drafts him number 1. They call his bluff. They said he'll come. Well, he didn't. He refused to sign the contract with Tampa Bay. Rather, he started his pro career with the defending world champion, the Kansas City Royals, coming off World Series crown. Instead of that massive lucrative deal, which we'll talk about in a minute, that he turned down in the NFL, he signed a, wait for it, 3-year contract, $1 million with the Kansas City Royals. He started out with the Memphis Chicks, their AA affiliate, and quickly made his way up to the major leagues. His first year, he hit 22 homers, 53 RBIs, and 10 stolen bases on a limited basis, a limited season. He makes the All-Star game 2 years into his career. And mind you, like I said, he growing up, he did not focus squarely on baseball. And here he is on the All-Star team. Now, if you'll remember the highlights from that game, that All-Star game, this is the same game Bo Jackson, in his first at-bat, cranks a ball 448 feet in the All-Star game. He has the massive throwout at home plate, MVP. What more can you say? 2 years in. Now, let's talk some statistics here for a minute. What one did you leave out, Bennett? You know which one you left out?
What's that?
You left out the most important one, and the one that Andy loves the most, WAR. Wins above replacement. Now, I know he is going to roll his eyes and say, I don't mean anything. The number one statistic that any major league outlet uses today to judge athletes is based on WAR. How many games, if we sign you, how many games are you better than the average Major League Baseball player? Average is about 5. What do you think Deion's is, Bennett?
5.5.
Wow, that is correct. Mr. Jackson's is 8.3. 8.3. So he is – that may seem like a little difference, but –
Blew him away.
That may seem like a minute difference. But the way it's weighted, that's a huge difference. The really good baseball players that you see that are in the Hall of Fame are usually above 10 to 12. So 8.3 is really, really high for a small sample size of 8 seasons. That he averaged 33 homers a year. He was a power hitter in Major League Baseball. He was not a stolen base specialist, even though he's got the speed. He was not known to steal a lot of bases, but he had tremendous power for that time. And he stole my thunder about the broken bats. He also holds the record for most Major League Baseball bats broken over his head. He also has run through walls to catch balls. I'll end by this. He also had this really strange habit of before the games. Most people before the games want to go out and just relax, listen to, back then, if you had a stereo system in there in the locker room. But he had archery targets set up in the clubhouse, and he shot bows. Bo shot bows. So he was an avid outdoorsman. He was as flashy as Deion Sanders was. Bo was the opposite. Bo had this Paul Bunyan mentality, but Bo wanted to be to himself. He didn't want to be out here going and standing on the Dallas Cowboys star, causing the ruckus. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to be just even killed. So that's Bo in Major League Baseball.
Also, one of the more athletic things is Spider-Man walk on the wall after a
Yes.
great catch as a highlight. You see a lot today. All right, so both these guys, especially considering the amount of time they spent in Major League Baseball or lack thereof compared to some other guys, still some impressive careers on the diamond. But what about the gridiron? Elrod, you said that Bo told the Buccaneers to piss off, and I don't blame him. I've looked into that story this week too, and the Bucs intentionally tried to sabotage his eligibility so he'd play football. But eventually, he does find his way to the NFL. Tell me a little bit about that and what he did when he was there.
Well, that contract that he turned down for the Buccaneers was $7.6 million. And he turned it down for a $1 million deal with the Royals. That's how much hatred him and his family had for that owner. So the way it worked, Buccaneers had a year of his rights. And if he didn't sign within the year, he got put into the next draft. So instead of going to the 87 draft that you see today, people show up in their nice little tuxedos, and it's a big party. Bo Jackson had a different take. He decided to sleep in. He slept in on the 87th draft. He was so put off about the process. There was one owner. Bo Jackson made it known that he wanted to play both sports. He wanted to play baseball and wanted to play football. A lot of pro football teams, they smelled like where there's smoke, there's fire. They're like, we don't want to be in the same position the Buccaneers were in, losing their first-round pick from the previous year. We don't want to be in that business. But there is one owner crazy enough to agree to this, and that is Al Davis. Al Davis has always had this affinity for fast athletes. Just he wants that freakish athlete. He wants the team that gets off the bus and you feel like you're going to get killed. That's the team he wants. And which player do you want coming off the bus? You want Bo Jackson. You want that athlete. So Al Davis was a fan of him. He negotiated a 5-year, $7.4 million contract. He had the highest signing bonus of any non-quarterback in the history of the league in this deal. His first year with the Raiders, he doesn't show up until week 8 because part of this contract was he wanted to come play football when baseball season was over. So that was about week 8. He had 8 carries on 37 yards. Pedestrian, not bad for someone who had no training camp, just showed up off the street. He was also sharing the backfield with a running back you might know. His name was Marcus Allen. So Marcus Allen and Bo Jackson are in the same backfield. We get to week 12, and Bo's getting in shape. He's getting that Auburn shape that he was in. There was a linebacker by the name of Brian Bosworth. You might have heard of him too. And he had some words. He was tired of hearing about how good Bo Jackson was. This myth, this legend. He's sick of it. He said he's going to put a stop to it all. Well, he didn't really stop him. Bo Jackson ran 91 yards over his tail, ran for 221 yards that night. This was the coming out party for Bo Jackson on the gridiron. That was the best game he had his rookie season. He had 554 yards, only 81 carries, which is about 7 yards a carry his first year. Outrageous. And he's only playing half a season. His next season, he comes in mid-year. His stats are comparable. I mean, these stats that he's putting up are crazy for just playing half a season, and he has no training camp. He has no preseason. He's just showing up off the street and reeling off 5 and 6 yards a carry. we get to 89. This 89 was his best season in the league. He had 9 starts, 950 yards, 5.5 yards a carry, 4 touchdowns, and he earns a Pro Bowl for the first time. Now we get to 91. We have the hip injury in the playoffs. Raiders and the Bengals. He has a terrible injury to his left hip. In his book, one of the urban legends that you hear about Bo Jackson is he got hurt mid-game in this game. He has this hip fracture. It's one of the most painful injuries an athlete can have. And he put it back in long enough to finish the game. And even the x-rays have backed this up, that he actually did this. A lot of people say, no, he injured this at the end of the game, but he's telling people that he injured it just to add to this myth. But the actual medical evidence says, yeah, he kind of did that, which is crazy. It's crazy. Well, within a month, he's diagnosed with this necrotic condition of this hip joint. By this time, he's lost all the cartilage in his hip. I mean, there's no way he can get back on the gridiron after this. There's no procedure they can do to reverse this. He's forced to retire from football. And then he's cut by the Royals. So after this injury, he was pretty much just cast off with the Wolves by the Raiders, and also his baseball career too. He did come back and play 2 seasons in Major League Baseball, but he was a shell of himself at this point because of the hip injury. And he said if he could do it again, if he could go back in time based on this injury that he had, his heart was never in football. It was a side gig for him, even though he was much better on the gridiron than he was as a baseball player. But he said that football ruined his life. And he's always been real concerned about CTE and that awareness. And he said he tells people today not to play football based on his experience.
Bennett Prime had a little bit longer stint in the NFL than Mr. Jackson. Tell me about Prime's time in the National Football League.
Goes by many names: Deion Sanders, Neon Deion, Primetime, or you can just call him Hall of Famer, a quarterback's worst nightmare, Mr. Talk the Talk and Walk the Walk, or you could just simply call him one of the greatest football players of all time. Deion was drafted 5th overall by Atlanta in 1989 and immediately lived up to his nickname Primetime. In his very first game, he returned a punt for a touchdown. He would go to play 5 years in Atlanta. He racked up 24 interceptions, and this is what really built the foundation for the Hall of Fame career. And I think by this time, after he'd racked up these 24 interceptions, quarterbacks are starting to figure out, like, hey, we don't need to throw to this guy. This is no good. 1992, he led the league in kick return yards, yards per return, and return touchdowns. And it's kind of funny, too. That was also his best year in baseball. So 92 was a really big year for Deion, apparently. But his 5 years would come and go in Atlanta. And in 1994, Mr. Deion was looking for a new team. Now, do you know that scene in Forrest Gump? Here it is. In Forrest Gump, where Jenny is sitting there on the side of the road. She's got her guitar. She's playing the guitar and she's singing. And that hippie guy drives up and jumps out of that van and goes, "Anybody want to go to San Francisco?" This is what happened with Deion. Deion's just chilling, okay? And the general manager, John McVay, rolls up, sticks his head out and goes, "Anybody want to go to San Francisco?" Deion goes, "I'll go." And he goes, "Far out." That's really what happened. That's why Deion went to San Francisco.
Believe it.
Now, Deion's 1994 campaign with San Francisco is arguably probably his best, at least defensively. He had 6 interceptions and a league leading 303 yards and a league leading 3 touchdowns, plus 2 interceptions in the postseason. Which, speaking of the postseason, I think without Deion, do they really make it to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl? I feel like he was one of those missing cogs that they needed on defense. So they win the Super Bowl. He gets his first ring, and he is named Defensive Player of the Year. Everything's all good and well, but it only lasts for 1 year. Then after 1 season, he goes and signs with the rival Dallas Cowboys. A 7-year, $35 million contract, which sounds kind of funny to us now. But at the time, that made Deion the highest paid defensive player ever. He was an immediate weapon for Dallas. He played defense, he did the return game, and sometimes he played a little bit of offense. In 1995, he won his second Super Bowl ring, consecutive back-to-back Super Bowl rings. And he'd go on to play a total of 5 seasons in Dallas. He got 14 interceptions, 4 punt returns for touchdowns, 3 kick returns for touchdowns, 4,853 all-purpose yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, 4 Pro Bowls, and 5 All-Pros. Then after that, he in 2000, the Dallas Cowboys kind of cut him for salary cap reasons. I guess that $35 million is just too much to carry for old Mr. Deion Sanders there. So he goes to Washington, plays 1 year there, and retires there. He's like, okay, I'm done. Well, then he comes back out of retirement. This would have been 2001. He comes back in 2004 and is talked into playing for Baltimore. One of his buddies, Mr. Ray Lewis, talked him in to come in to Baltimore to play for their defense. Well, the only problem was that his number 21 that he wore since he entered the league was taken. So what's he do? He wears 37. Why 37? Because that's how old he was. He wanted people to be aware that you've got a 37-year-old out here that's running around keeping up with all these young kids. So during this time here, he records his 9th career interception touchdown, which moved him in a tie for second all-time. And he would go on to cap off his career with a trip in Canton. Deion's stats for his 14-year career: 2 Super Bowl wins, 8 Pro Bowls, 9 All-Pros at cornerback, 2 All-Pros as a return specialist, 94 Defensive Player of the Year, 53 total interceptions, which I think could have been way more if quarterbacks just decided that they just quit throwing him to that side of the field. 7,838 all-purpose yards. He had 10 defensive touchdowns, 9 kick return / punt return touchdowns, 3 receiving touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown, which put him at a total of 22 touchdowns, which is more touchdowns than Bo Jackson. And Deion played defense. So I think that's just absolutely crazy that he would rack up 22 touchdowns and play defense.
Gotcha. All right. Well, guys, you both kind of told me throughout, what some of the achievements and the accomplishments that both Bo and Deion have achieved. But Bennett, kind of give me maybe a summary or a list or just all in one sitting instead of weaving them into the story. Tell me what Deion Sanders' achievements as a professional athlete were.
Deion has quite a long list of achievements, so I had to do a whole lot of cutting down just to get this in within maybe a couple hours worth here, but I'm going to try to hurry. It'll be a quick 2 hours. I'll start in college at FSU. Two-time All-American, Thorpe Award winner, second in school history in career interceptions, led the nation in 88 in punt return average, broke the school record for career punt return yards, had his number 2 retired, is in the College Football Hall of Fame, and College Football News ranks him number 8 of the 100 greatest college football players of all time. Skip a little bit over to baseball. Like I said, 92, he hit 533 in the World Series. He led the league in triples in 92. During the season, he hit 304 in 92. And he was clocked from, this is interesting, from first base to home plate in 9.9 seconds, which is moving it. Just skip over to football a little bit. This one's a little bit longer than those two. 8-time Pro Bowl, 9-time first-team All-Pro cornerback, All-Pro kick returner in 92, All-Pro punt returner in 98, 94 Defensive Player of the Year. We covered that. First-team 90s All-Decade for 2 positions, cornerback and punt return. So he's on there twice in the All-Decade in the 90s. 53 interceptions, 10 defensive touchdowns, 3 kick return touchdowns, 6 punt return touchdowns, a total of 3 receiving touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown. He is a member of the NFL 100th anniversary all-time team. He's in the Sporting News top 100 football players of all time. He's number 37, and there is no Bo in there. ESPN ranks him number 74 of the top 100. No Bo. NFL.com ranks him number 34 all-time in the top 100. No Bo. Elected to the Hall of Fame in 2011, his first year as an inductee. No Bo. So we talk a little bit about Bo knows. Well, there's a lot of Bo knows just then.
I wonder how you're going to bring that in.
And I'll finish up his achievements with this. He is the only athlete to appear in both a World Series and a Super Bowl, and the only athlete to ever hit a home run and score a touchdown in the very same week.
All right. Give me a condensed list of Mr. Bo Jackson's achievements.
Let's talk about football first for Mr. Jackson. You know, we talked about his career at Auburn earlier, but when he got there in 82, he was first team All-SEC as a freshman. As a sophomore, he averaged 7.7 yards a carry. When I think about is a player exceptional, I want to look at how they did against their biggest rivals. In 83, no bigger team than Alabama, Bo Jackson goes for 256 yards on 20 carries against Alabama that year. He got screwed out of the Heisman, like my boy Peyton did in 97 that year too. He has an injury in 84. In 85, he wins a Heisman his senior year. There's many publications that has Bo Jackson as somewhere between 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the greatest college football running backs of all time. He won the Heisman in 85. He's a Walter Camp Award winner, 85 as the best collegiate player. He was a Sport News Player of the Year. He was a 2-time consensus All-American in 83 and 85. If he doesn't have that injury in 84, I think there's no question he's the best college football running back of all time. And he's a 3-time All-SEC. His number 34 jersey's retired by Auburn, and he's regarded as the best Auburn player ever in their 110 years of playing football. If you look at the baseball statistics, he was an all-star. He was an all-star game MVP. He was a comeback player of the year when he came back from his hip injury in 93. He was 10th in the MVP race in 89. He has a 30 home run season. He's got 4 20 home run seasons. He's got 2 seasons where he has more than 20 stolen bases, and he has, unlike Deion, a 100 RBI season where he's playing half the games. It's crazy. that he's putting up these stats. So he may not have had the NFL success that Mr. Sanders had, but he has something that Mr. Sanders doesn't have. And we'll talk more about that in the next topic.
All right, well, then let's just move into the next topic then. They're legends in college. They're legends on the diamond. They're legends on the gridiron. But Elrod, tell me now, 25 plus years since the Bows played anything, what is the legacy of Bo Jackson?
Bo Jackson is quite simply, right, the greatest athlete in the history of video games. And this is not even up for debate. You know, the kids listening to our show, they've always had Madden. The kids will never know what it's like to grow up in the 80s like me and you, right?
When we were born in the
80s. These two old men were. But you remember playing Tecmo. Bo Jackson on this game is quite simply unstoppable. There is a YouTube video that I encourage our listeners to watch. It's a minute long, and it shows somebody taking a kickoff on Tecmo, going back and running backwards on the 1 yard line, putting Bo Jackson in the game, and he's zigzagging around all the defenders. And this goes on for a minute, and they can't stop him. Tecmo was the first video game, it was on Nintendo, that had real NFL players. Bo Jackson was the first player in the history of the NFL to be featured on a video game. It had real teams. So you can thank Bo Jackson for Madden football later on because he was the first one. I'm remiss if I don't talk about Nike and Bo Jackson. Nike in the mid 80s had a person under contract. You may know him, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, but they were still in a tug of war with Adidas over who was going to own the 80s. I mean, they had Air Jordans. Bo Jackson cemented Nike as the brand going forward for the kids out there with their Bo Knows campaign. Made a ton of money off this campaign. We talked a lot about how, Bo Jackson did not have the NFL career per se than Deion did. And that's true. That injury robbed him. We'll never know. The legacy of Bo Jackson is going to be the 4.1 clock time by a scout at the NFL Combine. 4.12 would put Bo Jackson as the fastest man in the history of professional football. And it would also be faster than Usain Bolt in the Olympics. And it really did happen, if you believe the scout. If you believe the scout that was there, it's not recognized because it was not officially timed. But it was one of these urban legends that is 100% true. Believe me on this. Bo Jackson's legacy is this. When he retired and went back to Alabama, he's been big on charities. He's trying to help the poor areas around Hoover, where he's from. He went back to college and fulfilled one of his promises to his mother to get his he got that. He got a master's, and he is currently working on a hospital board trying to help the underprivileged youth there in Alabama. Bo Jackson will be known for his charitable endeavors, but he'll be known quite simply as this. When I do this show, right, I'm like you. I want to know what other people are saying, right? I want to know not just my intellect. I want to know what other people think. Athlon Sports had a list 2 years ago on best two-way athletes of all time. Who do you think was number one, right? It wasn't Bo Jackson or Deion Sanders.
Really?
No. It's quite obvious. We talked about this guy earlier.
Jim Thorpe.
Yeah. Number 2, surprisingly, is hold on a second.
Charlie Ward.
It was not Charlie Ward. He was 5.
He was a point guard.
He was a point guard. Jim Brown. I had forgot that Jim Brown played lacrosse. But when you look at major professional sports, the 4 major ones we think about, number 1 on that list, Bo Jackson. He may not have the stats, but I'm looking at athletic ability. I'm looking at someone that can run a 4.12 in the 40. I'm looking at someone that can crack baseball bats over their heads like it's a toothpick. I'm looking at someone who averages 6 yards a carry, and he just comes off the bus. He doesn't. Can you imagine, just for a second? Bennett talked a bit about this earlier, about how if Deion Sanders had just focused on baseball, how good he would have been. Imagine how good Bo Jackson would have been if he had trained properly for football. He was averaging 7 yards a carry coming off the bus. If he was in top-tip shape, he would go down as one of the best running backs of all time, absent that injury. One of the reasons he had the injury, which we really haven't talked about, is he was not 100% healthy because he doesn't have the training regimen, because he's splitting between baseball and football. Bo Jackson, his legacy really is what if. What if he had focused on baseball or football? But when you look at both of these sports and you compare both athletes, the better one between the both, when you average them out, is Bo Jackson.
I have 2 qualms with what you said.
Okay?
Number 1, I ran a 4.4 today because my neighbor saw me. Just ask them. They'll tell you. And number 2, Bo Jackson did set the standard for what a video game player untouchable can be. But he does not still hold that title. Madden 2004 Michael Vick is the most untouchable video game football player of all time. But anyway, Bennett, prime time. Deion Sanders hasn't been on the football field since 2004, hasn't been on the baseball diamond in even longer. So 15, 20 years past his playing days, what is Prime's legacy?
I would love to tell you that. But first, I have a few things to say about some of the things that were said about Bo Jackson here. Number 1, the Tecmo Bowl. You're absolutely right. He was a monster on Tecmo Bowl. I won't take that away from him. This is the first time I'm actually not bashing Bo Jackson tonight. But Deion Sanders had his own video game. Prime time. I had Prime Time 96. Me and Rut would play the crap out of it back in the day. Back in the day. Number 2, Deion also had a pretty – okay, he didn't have the Bo Nose campaign, but Deion was also a Nike guy too. Ran a bunch of ads with Nike. And Deion was also with Pepsi and a few others. And I got to noticing something. I don't know if the 2 are related, but it's worth noting. And maybe you might know more about it than me, Rod. Bo Jackson made the All-Stars in baseball in 89.
Mm-hmm.
And he made the Pro Bowl in 1990.
Same year, same calendar year.
Same calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what also came out that same calendar year?
What?
That Bo Knows Huge campaign.
Oh, gosh.
That came out in 89 through 90, that calendar year.
I know where this is going.
I'm not saying nothing. I'm just saying they came out at the same time.
The stats back it up. That's all.
He does have the stats, and sometimes people that do have the stats get overlooked, but sometimes people that also may have the same stats get bumped in for popularity. Just saying. It's well-deserved. He did have the stats, but it's just interesting to note.
Uh-huh.
Now, moving on.
Especially wasn't the All-Star game fan voted?
I don't know if it was back
fan
then.
voted back then?
I don't know.
I don't know. We'll have to update the viewers. All right. The last thing we'll talk about, then I'll get into my spiel, is that Bo Jackson 40-yard time. Now, like you said, I mean, the combine was very, very in the early stages of its development. I think it was only the second year they had the combine whenever Bo decided not to do it. So
I'll say this: it was not on NFL Network, and Rich Eisen was not running the 40 with his shirt off back then.
it's true. So first off, you've got him not doing it at the official events. So where he gets timed at, do we know the place? Do we know if it's a legit, sportsplex? When he runs that 40, could there have been a very, very, very slight slope to where he was running? It's possible. Whenever they measured out the 40 yards, could it have been 39 yards, 2 feet, and 10 inches or something? It's very possible.
I think Brian Bosworth would agree with me that he could run a 4.12 after he ran straight through him.
Now, all that stuff is just speculation, but one cold, hard fact that seems to kind of go against this 4.1 that he ran, or 4.1, 4.13, 4.12, whatever he said. In 1983, Bo Jackson had a 6.18 55-meter run. Usain Bolt, probably one of the fastest men that has ever lived, ran a 5.92 55-meter, which when you take this 5.92 and do the math, it comes out to a 4.10 40-yard dash for Usain Bolt. So for Bo Jackson to also run the same as Usain Bolt, he would have had to have ran as fast as one of history's greatest sprinters. And then there at the very end for his 55-meter run, slowed down enough to be that equal of an average NCAA sprinter. It just doesn't add up for him to run the 4.10.
I believe
it doesn't add up.
It.
But
will you believe
we'll
it
never
when
know.
this argument's over?
We'll never know. Anywho, Mr. Deion, his legacy is a couple of things. Ones that came to mind for me was versatility and longevity. Now, first, for versatility, we talked about him playing 3 sports in high school, 3 sports in college, how he was a pretty good MLB player, had a lot of untapped potential there, and how he's considered, one of the all-time greats in NFL, at least especially for a cornerback position. But we haven't really talked a ton about how versatile he was in football. At cornerback, he pretty much revolutionized the position. He would shut down half of the field, and his interception totals would have been way higher than 53 had quarterbacks just decided just to completely, stop throwing to him altogether. He had 19 defensive touchdowns. And what he did at the cornerback position really opened the door for other defensive players to collect these huge contracts. There's actually a rule called the Deion Sanders rule, which it's legal. Y'all would understand it better than me, but it talks about something about the prorated portion of the signing bonus counts against the salary cap. Something about how Deion made so much money, but it was only, the 7-year, $35 million, which at the time made him the highest paid defensive player ever. But that kind of opened the door for defensive players to get recognized and to start collecting big checks like the quarterbacks do, blah, 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 blah. Second, kick return. He led the league in 92 with a 26.7 average, and he led in yards with 1,067 and 3 touchdowns. Punt return. Led the league in 98 yards per return with 15.6 and had 2 touchdowns, which also led the league. And he had 6 touchdowns in his career and 2,199 punt return yards. And even wide receiver. He played a little bit of wide receiver, mostly with Dallas. I think he did a tiny bit at San Francisco, but most of this came in Dallas. His career at receiver, 60 receptions, 784 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But doesn't just jump off the page, but those stats there are comparable to Calvin Johnson, Mr. Megatron, his rookie year. Those are almost on pace with what Megatron had his rookie year. He scored a touchdown 6 different ways. He's the only player in the history of the NFL to do that. He made 90s all decade at 2 positions. And when you look at Deion, he was basically a 4-position guy rolled into just one gifted athlete. And then I talked a little bit about his longevity. Deion was able to play at a very high level, especially in the NFL, for 14 seasons. And he was a perennial All-Pro. He made it 9 times. He was 38 when he finally decided to hang the cleats up for good, which is incredible for somebody his age to go out there, like I said earlier, and run around with these guys that are 10, 15 plus years younger than him. He also played 9 years of pro baseball, which is very respectable when you consider that the average baseball player's career is only 5.5 years. So, when you think Deion, you think of, the shutdown corner, the do-rags, the jewelry, the high-stepping, him being all flashy. But he's so much more than that. He's one of the all-time great return specialists. He lined up on both sides of the ball in Dallas, which is something that hadn't been done in like 40 years. The last person to do that was a guy also in the Hall of Fame by the name of Mr. Chuck Bednarik. So to me, his versatility and his longevity is Deion's legacy.
All right, gentlemen. It's time for closing arguments. Mr. Bennett, you're up first.
Now, Brett, I'm going to open up with a question for you. And I think I might know the answer to this.
Okay.
In your eyes, who is the greatest wide receiver of all time?
Jerry Rice.
Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice, the all-time greatest wide receiver, and one could argue one of the greatest football players of all time.
I would argue it.
Yeah, it's a valid argument you can make. Do you know what Jerry Rice said about Mr. Deion Sanders?
I have a feeling you're about to tell me.
He said that he used to lose sleep at night when he knew that a matchup with Deion Sanders awaited him when he awoke. That's how great Deion Sanders was, at least at football. And I've got a few closing points to make, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Elrod. Number one, it's like Bobby Bowden said, he is the measuring stick for athletic ability. He is the standard. He is what everybody else after him have been measured by. Every year at the pro draft, you hear about which, cornerback or maybe return specialist, and they'll say, this guy could be the next Deion Sanders, or this guy doesn't really translate as good. He doesn't stack up to Deion Sanders. Your Richard Shermans, your Darrelle Revises, your Champ Baileys, who are they always compared to? Deion Sanders. Number two, for most of his career, he made professional baseball his summer hobby. And he was actually pretty decent at it. I'm not going to go back and show the stats, but I showed he was more than capable as a baseball player. And that surprises a lot of people. They think that he might have had a much more mediocre career than he did. I think he gets overshadowed a little bit. Number 3, and this one's kind of a four-parter here. He is the only player in NFL history, like I said, to score 6 different ways. He is the only player to appear in a World Series and a Super Bowl. He's the only player to hit a home run and score a touchdown in the same week. And he was the only player in the last, it took 40 years for somebody to start on both sides of the ball, on the ball. I think Chuck did it like in the 40s or 50s, and flash forward to the 90s until you get Deion to do it. So no one was more versatile than Deion. Number 4, Deion Sanders is the greatest because he played against the greatest and he locked them down the greatest. Think about some of the people that Deion matched up with in the late 80s, early 90s. Jerry Rice, Michael Irvin, Chris Carter, Tim Brown, Andre Reed, and James Lofton. All of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. They're some of the best wide receivers that have ever played. And all of them constantly would get shut down by Deion. So what does that say about Deion? So to wrap it up, you've got Bo Jackson, Mr. Bo Knows, and you've got Deion Sanders, Mr. Primetime. My personal opinion, it's Bo Knows. It's primetime.
Mr. Elrod.
Deion Sanders is the greatest cornerback of all time. No question about it. I don't think anyone out there is going to try to make that argument that he's not. However, when I think of Deion Sanders, I really don't think about his baseball career at all. I think if you ask the average sports fan, it's going to take them a while to really even remember that Deion played both baseball and football. This show tonight is about best two-way athlete. When you look at the stats, especially on the baseball side, look at the WAR. I know we talked a lot about the hits and the triples and all that, but the one – I know you don't like the stat, right? But wins above replacement for modern-day baseball is how modern-day baseball players are judged, and it's based on how prior generations of baseball players are judged. And it's pretty spot on when you look at the top 10 of all time. It's who you would expect it to be. It's Babe Ruth. It's Mickey Mantle from our prior episodes that people need to watch, by the way. They're on Anchor. You see, I'm the one plugging the show tonight.
And YouTube.
YouTube. There we go.
And wherever you get podcasts.
Bennett just said, I couldn't have said it any better, Bennett. For baseball, for Deion, baseball was a summer hobby. For Bo, it was both. There was a Game Boy game. I can't remember what the name of it was, but Bo Jackson was featured on it. I don't think it was his game, but you could choose. You could play the football version or you could play the baseball version. It was on Game Boy. You remember that game? I've been trying to think of it all day long. I can't think of it. It was a game for Game Boy. It's going to kill me. But the essence of that video game is how good Bo Jackson was at both sports. He averaged over 6 yards a carry in football. He was an all-star at baseball. He sailed at both. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. Deion Sanders can't say that. He was not a Heisman Trophy winner. Now, if you'll indulge me, I want to take you to school, right, and talk to you about some Bo Jackson true stories. These really These are legit, I promise you. Let's talk about Bo Jackson at Yankee Stadium. The first time he ever set foot in Yankee Stadium, he goes up to the plate in old Yankee Stadium and hits a 412-yard home run to dead center field. Second time up at Yankee Stadium, Bo Jackson goes a little bit further and hits a 464 opposite field home run. longtime Yankee fans that were there in attendance that day said that the only people that have ever hit a home run that far in Yankee Stadium, you might recognize their names. They are Ruth, Gehrig, and Mantle are the only people that ever made it that far at Yankee Stadium. George Brett said it was colossal. He said, I had to stand there and just watch all of this craziness happen. The third time up, the then Yankee manager, Stunt Merrill, walked out to the mound and asked the pitcher, how are you going to get Bo Jackson out this time? He says, well, I'll pitch outside. I'll pitch outside and he won't be able to hit me. And the manager said, it better be way outside. Well, he hits another home run, and that was 3 home runs. And that was also the game where he threw out the player at home plate when he was in the outfield on the warning track. Bo Jackson used to have these crazy home run derbies before the game. And there was a story. Let me see if I can find it for our viewers real quick. I've got it pulled up here. Let's see here. I had it bookmarked. It's one of those things that it's like, it's crazy that happened. Let's see here. There's so many of these stories. Yeah, I could tell these for 5 hours and still have stories to tell.
Most people would already be prepared.
There we go. Bo Jackson used to have these crazy home run derbies, as I just said. He said that he wanted to try hitting from the opposite side, the left-hand side. In batting practice, he hits a ball over 450 feet from the left-hand side of the plate, and he never had hit from the left-hand side in these batting practice. Of the great athletes of the 20th century, we talked about Jim Thorpe, we talked about Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, but without question, the greatest athlete of the 80s, you could almost make the argument for the 90s too, and definitely the best two-way athlete is Bo Jackson. It's not even close. The man, the myth, and the legend himself, Mr. Bo Jackson. And Tecmo Bo. Can I throw that in there? Tecmo Bo.
The name of the game was Bo Jackson 2 Games in 1. Nintendo.
Very original name.
From 1991. You can buy a copy now on Amazon for $4.99.
There we go.
How much is a Game Boy?
Probably, I have no idea.
We got to get one of those too.
The game itself won't do you much good. Crap. You know, I did my research before this show started, and was in a bit of a conundrum looking at it. You know, like I've said before, like Elrod alluded to earlier, I like to go see what other people think. And I looked at a lot of polls of best two-way guys, mainly of the modern era. So there was no Jim Thorpe. There were no Jim Browns in the list. Pretty much every list had Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders as number 1 and number 2, and they were pretty much evenly split. The ones I saw on who was 1 and who was 2. And I came to this thought in my mind, and I was really hoping, I told, for those viewing / listening, I told these two guys before we started recording, it's going to come down to the arguments, because I found myself in a conundrum after doing my own research, and after the arguments, I find myself still in that conundrum. And here's what it is. After doing my research, when I think of Deion Sanders, I think of 2 words. And those are the 2 words that Bennett talked about when talking about the legacy of Deion Sanders, and that's versatility and longevity. The fact that Deion, especially on the gridiron, could play so many positions and played for so long without injury. The fact that he did, I don't think I realized his baseball numbers were that good, Bennett, but the fact that he did only play half seasons and it was his summer hobby. I look at Bo, and Bo was obviously more committed to baseball. And football was kind of something he did when baseball ended for those few years. But I said I thought of two words when it came to Deion Sanders, and that was versatility and longevity. The two words I think of when I think Bo Jackson are what if. What if Bo had played an entire NFL season? What if Bo hadn't had the hip injury? What if Bo had not played football at all? What kind of baseball career would he have had when that was his sole focus? And the conundrum I had coming into this is the conundrum I still have now. If you're just looking at the God-given talent of who is the best athlete between these two, I have to go Bo Jackson. The physical specimen he was, a guy that had the speed he had, maybe not quite 4.12, but the guy that had the speed he had at his size, because this guy was a monster. If we're purely looking at who is the best athlete, I would sit here and say Bo Jackson. But if we're looking at who had the better professional career, you look at versatility, you look at longevity, it comes down to this. And it's not all because of skill, it's because of choices, it's because of injury. Deion had a much better football career than Bo Jackson on a professional level. Again, Bo doesn't get hurt. Maybe that's different. Bo decides to play a full few seasons. That could be different. But as it is, Deion has a much better football career. Bo has a better baseball career than Deion, but I don't think it's by as wide of a margin as the margin that Deion has Bo in football. So if we look at just who is the best athlete, it's Bo Jackson. But as the winner of this show for who had the best career as a two-sport athlete, it pains me because I liked Deion Sanders for 1 year in 94. He went to Florida State. He left the Niners for the Cowboys. I'm not a huge Deion Sanders fan. But who had the best two-sport career? I've got to say Deion Sanders. But this was tough for me because best athlete between the two, I'd have to go Bo. But again, Deion, versatility, longevity are the two words. With Bo, the two words, they're not Bo knows, they're what if. And I think Bo doesn't get hurt, there's probably a different winner of this argument. But based on only the facts, ma'am, of what we have, Bennett, you've convinced me. But that was really tough coming in, and really neither one of you really separated yourself much in the arguments because you both did a good job. Elrod, good job. I don't say that to you often.
You don't. That's one thing you got right tonight.
Bennett, victory speech.
Yeah, I want to clear the air a little bit about what people think about Deion too, real quick. Because when you think of Deion, you think of, like I said, like the bling, the sunglasses, the do-rag. He had the BMW and the tricked out golf cart and all this stuff. But all the teammates from the research that I looked at, they loved Deion. They said whenever the cameras came off and all the reporters are gone, he completely flipped who he was. He was like a gentle soul. He was always laughing and smiling. He was like very uplifting to the clubhouse. He was like just like a big teddy bear. He didn't do all that flashiness stuff. It was just for the cameras. So Deion was kind of like like a performer almost for the cameras. Found that very interesting.
Almost went with Bo, just for the fact that Deion didn't know who Kevin Byard was a couple years ago. After Kevin Byard.
Yeah.
That was.
While we're on here, I want to go ahead and make a bold statement. we all know that Florida State is the DBU, but I also want to declare Florida State as the multi-sport university. Think about it. They had Deion. They had Charlie Ward. You had Jameis Winston, who did 2 sports. You had Antonio Cromartie that did 2 sports. You have Warwick Dunn, who did 2 sports. That's a pretty impressive list of names of people that played multiple sports for Florida State.
Are you talking about lobster wrangling for Jameis, his other sports?
Hey, if you want to throw it in there, that's 3 sports then.
Hollywood was a point guy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that will wrap up another episode. What will we be discussing next week? Well, guys and gals, that is up to you. When this video drops, as soon as this is over, go over to Twitter and we have a poll up. You get to vote on what you want next week's topic to be. If you're listening to us on the podcast, it's up already. Head over there right now. Here are your choices. If you all will recall, I think it was episode 7 of this show, which was like 10 episodes ago now, 9 or 10, which is crazy to think we've been doing that for this long. We did what we called a hodgepodge episode, and it was a bunch of mini questions, a bunch of mini debates, stuff that wasn't long enough for a whole show, and it was food themed. We called it our smorgasbord episode. This time, we're doing another hodgepodge episode, but we're going to let you all pick what the category is going to be. We will come up with the questions or the short debates for whatever it is, but you have 4 choices, and here's what they are. The first one is something we spent a lot of time talking about tonight. The first one is baseball. Baseball season is underway finally, and there are several shorter debates that we can do that we don't necessarily know that we can get a whole episode out of. Baseball is your first choice. Your second choice is music. There are tons of small music debates that can't make up a whole episode. The third is movies. Same with movies. There are a lot of small debates we can do that don't necessarily make a full episode. And the fourth is music. So the choice is yours. I'm not exactly sure when this poll will run through, probably Friday night, but make sure you get over there and vote. Again, vote for baseball, music, movies, or television. And guys, it'll be up to you. Whichever one you vote is what we will be doing next week. Again, that is going to be on Twitter. The poll is on Twitter at Convince Me Show. Make sure you're following us because this poll thing is going to be something we're going to do probably not every episode, but quite a bit. So make sure you're following us on Twitter so you don't miss those chances to kind of steer the show. Make sure you're following us on Instagram, Convince Me Show, Facebook.com/Convince Me Show. The YouTube is tinyurl.com/Convince Me Show. And guys, again, this is our last full episode on Facebook. It's kind of the end of even though short, kind of the end of an era, gentlemen, wouldn't you say?
It is.
Yeah, I'm sad.
It is. It's sad. But all good things must come to an end.
But it's not really coming to an end. We're just moving to the next chapter. We'll still be on your Facebook feed every Tuesday night, just not for 2 hours. And then, podcast is a little better for long form because you can, while you're driving, while you're at work, whatever it may be, you can catch us on Wednesday on the podcast. But if you really just love to see our ugly faces, the videos will still be dropping in their entirety on YouTube, but they will be dropping the same day as the podcast does. You don't have to wait a week like we have been. So guys, just hang with us. We'll remind you of all these changes as they come. Again, thank you for those of you that helped us help try to nominate us for the podcast awards. We'll see if we were successful this week. Congratulations to Matthew Jones, winner of $50. Reach out to me. If I haven't heard from you in the next few days, I'll reach out to you. Gentlemen, any parting words?
Yeah, sure. Any podcast episode where we get in Forrest Gump and Deion Sanders, it's by far going to be one of my favorite episodes that we've done. And I'm counting on you guys next week to vote on what you want. And I want you guys to make it one of my favorite episodes. Thank you guys for the support.
You know what, right? Bo knows. Bo knows who the real victor was tonight. I think the world knows too.
If it's best athlete, yes, it's Bo.
But wasn't that the
Best,
title tonight?
best career. Well, it's the best two-sport. I mean, who is the best two-sport player? Who had the best two-sport career? It's Deion. Best two-sport athlete. And I'll be completely honest and transparent. While we're still on the air, we're just going to air all the laundry here. I struggled when I had this conundrum beforehand and had to go back and look and see how I worded the Facebook post to see which one I would go with. So that's really how it is because I met that conundrum. But guys, do you agree? Do you disagree? Probably half and half. Feel free to let us know. Just don't be ugly. We don't handle negativity. I mean, I don't expect this to get NASCAR topic level negativity like we had a few weeks ago.
It's a different world.
No, until we get too big for me to read all of our comments, I'm going to delete the negative ones. But who knows? With your guys' help, one day we'll have all kinds of negative comments because I'm not going to take the time to read them. But guys, thanks for joining us again. Until next week, for Mr. Elrod, for Mr. Bennett, I'm Rod. Peace.
Who knows?
Bye.